Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Yasmina Al-Suri and I'm a 2L here at Fold. I am also the events co-chair for the Middle Eastern Law Students Association. I will be introducing our esteemed speaker, Mr. Faraz Musili. We will start with a presentation, then we will have some questions that we prepared, and finally, time permitting, we will open it up to the general audience to ask questions. Faraz is a founding partner at Lloyd Musili LLC. He specializes in counseling technology companies from startups in their early formation and development through support of multi-million-dollar business operations of the largest companies in the world. He has also served as senior corporate counsel for both Apple and Dell, where he counseled clients on product development and IP matters, including advertising, marketing, copyright, and trademark strategies and risks. Prior to serving as corporate counsel, Faraz practiced with DLA Piper in the intellectual property group, specializing in patent litigations as a registered U.S. patent attorney. Please join me in welcoming Faraz to Berkeley Law.
Thank you, Yasmina. So I'm going to try to keep this fairly interactive as well. I've got a presentation set up, but we can always end up venturing from it. Is this on? This looks like it's...
It looks like it's on.
Yeah.
Is it not working?
Okay, there we go.
It's a little mushy.
Very good. So, good afternoon, y'all. That Texas draw won't leave you no matter how long you've been out of Texas. So I actually taught classes at the University of Texas School of Law and licensing as well. So it hasn't been that long since I've been in a law school classroom just like this. But the focus of our talk, it's going to be a little personal journey. It's going to give you a little insight into my background, how I came to this country, how I ended up choosing the career of law, and some of the choices that I made along the lines of my practice. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started here. So I am an immigrant. My family ended up immigrating from Syria, which unfortunately is in the news for all the wrong reasons now. And there's a lot of immigrant stories that I've got built in here as well to kind of give you a sense of, the challenges that some of the folks that may not have been born here face in trying to assimilate into the education system. So, as I said, born in Damascus, Syria, what I had always prefaced as the oldest city in the world. Since you all are law students, you require the full disclaimer. It's oldest continually inhabited city in the world. So apparently Jericho was destroyed, so fell out of the running for oldest city. Had the perfect profile according to today's shithole country standards that Trump has propagated, being Syrian, being Arab, being Muslim. My family were actually refugees. So my father ended up leaving Syria because he had been imprisoned as a political dissident in Damascus. So as you can imagine, these are all the telltale signs of a handicap in starting off a life in a new country, especially considering the fact that we didn't speak English. We had no family whatsoever in the States. My father ended up choosing Texas, Houston, Texas, to end up immigrating to. My father is an engineer by education. He was the first person in his family to attend college. He had studied mechanical engineering, specialized in HVAC. For those of you technologically inclined, that's heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And as you can imagine, Houston, Texas is the air conditioning capital of the US, so it made sense. We desperately tried to assimilate, so you can end up seeing me and my sister there, my partner in crime, who's also a lawyer, by the way, practicing in Houston, Texas. Some of those struggles included, again, that language, having to go through a backdrop, right, where the U.S. and the West generally weren't very friendly towards Arabs and Muslims in particular. So you had the American embassy bombings in Beirut that obviously colored outlook towards Arabs. The movie True Lies, you may remember, with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So anyway, I'm trying to give you an idea of the kind of environment that a little Arab kid growing up in Texas would have faced. And it's really interesting because, as you can see, I don't look like what most people think of as an Arab, as a Syrian, or as a Muslim. So what was particularly interesting is that it ended up opening me up to listening to commentary that was never intended for my ears. So I would hear things, and we'll step through that. But even in law school, when after September 11th happened, which was my first year of law school, I remember waking up in the morning before going to law school, seeing this on the news, and cringing, and thinking that there's no way that I actually wanted to even attend school that day, knowing full well the backlash that would affect Arabs and Muslims, etc. I steeled my resolve, went into law school that day, and again, just heard some of the most vile comments about Muslims generally, about Arabs, etc. And I remember having a conversation with a particular girl in my law school class and talking about the kind of retribution, right, that the U.S. would end up unleashing. And her argument was the Taliban and the Afghan people should be absolutely responsible and held to account. And when I asked her why, she said, they elected the Taliban, they're responsible for whatever decisions that they've made. So even at a prestigious law school, such as the University of Texas School of Law, you can have that type of ignorance related to these kind of race relations. That's a good way to segue into just my education. And this will all kind of come together. Hopefully, you'll see the pieces getting set up here. As immigrants, we ended up dealing with English as a secondary language. I actually had to take speech classes as well, given the differences in pronunciation and some of the characters in Arabic. We had a deep sense of national and cultural pride. My parents made sure that we attended Arabic school on weekends. We were actually not allowed to speak English at home. That was one of the rules that they instilled to ensure that we actually ended up learning the language and were able to, communicate and understand our cultural and religious traditions. It's funny because being in Texas, football is a tremendous tradition. So I had actually tried out for my football team in middle school and had actually made the 1A team. I was ecstatic. When I came home and I told my parents, they were like, yeah, we're not taking you to those practices. So the idea of any kind of extracurricular that involved sports was absolutely off the table. When I told them that I was interested in the National Forensics League, right, the speech and debate, absolute support. They would take me to tournaments everywhere, and that was a tremendous part in helping me become assimilated and hone this craft that later in my life I would end up practicing. My higher education was also quite diverse. So my father always had these patriotic notions of going back and building up the Middle East, kind of going as an expat, right, and taking the learnings and experience that he had to better our own homeland and our own cultural development. So with that, I ended up going to 4 different high schools in 3 different countries. We ended up moving to Saudi Arabia. And as you can imagine, that was a tremendous cultural shock. Going from a country like the US, where my mom would pick us up and drop us off at school, to a country where my mom is not allowed to drive. After that, we ended up moving back to Syria, and I ended up going to a British school and ended up doing a Cambridge education. So I ended up getting my International General Certificate of Secondary Education. We ended up moving back to the US because my parents couldn't see us attending university anywhere else but at the best universities in the world, which were offered here in the US. I was fortunate enough to end up getting a scholarship. We, as Arab Americans, always had a big push towards medicine. There's a long, long history of medical developments in the Islamic and Arabic world, and that was always a sign of prestige, right, for a family to have a son or a daughter practice medicine. So with that intention, I ended up going to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore and studying biomedical engineering and computer science. I'd always been a big tech nerd. I'll admit this here, but I'll never admit it in a social function. I was the founder and president of the first computer club that we had in high school. And this might seem nonsensical, but we actually did a presentation on the internet and this advancement, right, and what it ended up posing. You might ask, okay, yes, I understand you want to go on to medicine. Why would you end up studying computer science? But that was a real passion for technology that I had, even at an early age. While at Hopkins, I ended up volunteering at a shock and trauma center at the University of Maryland. Ended up seeing all kinds of things that I never really wanted to see again. I ended up seeing a 14-year-old girl die in front of me, and I saw the doctor trying to explain to her folks what had happened and where that cerebral hemorrhaging made a girl that was quite healthy, coming back from soccer practice, that would never breathe again. At that point, I ended up deciding that I wanted to pursue a master's in computer science engineering, thinking that would give me an opportunity to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. So, again, went through this master's program and ultimately ended up applying for consulting positions, ended up getting some offers. But what was really, really interesting is that the dot-com crash ended up coinciding with my graduation. And a lot of friends couldn't find jobs in that environment. I was particularly lucky because I had decided on a whim to take the LSAT. I was working at the computer lab as a computer consultant right at the university when not everyone had laptops, and I actually had to go to a computer lab day to be able to have access to computers, and studied for the LSAT then. Long story short, I ended up getting accepted and got a scholarship to the University of Texas to study law, and it was kind of a no-brainer from the beginning. Anyone who's got an engineering or science background immediately ends up getting recruited for anything related to intellectual property, patents, etc. So with that, I was actually the chair for the IP conference and symposium that was held at the University of Texas. I was also on the IP Law Journal. I'm basically giving you a bit of a background on the shaping, right, from starting with biomedical engineering, going through computer science, and ultimately ending in a practice in law. I want to talk about some of these career choices and what ends up happening, and hopefully some of you will find this relevant in making your own decisions related to your career choices and where you end up going. So, having graduated from the University of Texas School of Law, I ended up getting recruited by DLA Piper. I ended up joining their practice in Austin, Texas. I was doing patent litigation and other kind of complex litigation. Honestly, I hated it. I hated almost every minute of it. And a lot of times people have a hard time recognizing that even though what is the most prestigious positions and internships, et cetera, that a lot of people seek out, they may not be fits for each of us. While I enjoyed the intellectual rigor, right, related to some of the, the patent questions and technology questions, I found litigation to be absolutely pointless, a tremendous waste of resources. That's just my personal opinion. You can take it for what it's worth, right? And especially the kind of cases that I was working on. We're talking about bet the company litigation, where essentially a patent claim could end up completely kneecapping a company, right, and taking them out of business if a claim is to be upheld. When I think that ultimately the real way for any type of litigation is a negotiation, right? It's a business decision. There's a license that can ultimately be pulled out. One of the other things that I noticed very early on in my practice is that I looked at the partners that were my mentors, right, my managers, et cetera. And I honestly could not picture my life matching theirs. It wasn't something that I ever aspired to. I saw a lot of broken marriages, frankly. I saw partners that didn't get to see that their children, that were estranged from their children. And it was just something that stayed in the back of my mind, that at every inflection point in your career, you'll be offered the opportunity to make a decision between money, prestige, and family lifestyle choices. And they may be subtle decisions that you have to end up making, but ultimately, you are responsible for your own career. You're responsible for your own life, and each of these choices that you make have ripple effects throughout the rest of your career. One of the other interesting challenges that I had at Big Law, I remember a particular situation where DLA had actually mandated pro bono hours for every lawyer, right? I think we were required to do between 50 and 100 hours at that time. And this was fairly novel when they had implemented this policy. At one point, there was a bulletin related to some of the opportunities that were presented for some of the pro bono chances that we had. And they were very high-profile pro bono cases. One of the emails came out related to arbitrating some of the conflict in the Philippines between some of the Muslim separatists, right, and the Filipino nationals. And I remember that a partner, he was actually the managing partner, or the former managing partner at the Austin office, responded to all at the office and said, "Why are we getting involved in Sharia questions? And is this something that we want as a firm to be reflected that we're actually helping these Muslim separatists or terrorists, as he called them?" And I remember, again, thinking, this is an opportunity, right? I can either stay silent, right, and allow a prejudicial statement like that to stand, right, and kind of linger where you've got this authority figure within the firm making these statements which are completely wrong, right? When you're talking about facilitating mediations, that's the best and highest order work that lawyers can end up doing. in any kind of armed conflict especially. And to be able to summarily dismiss any type of work because they happen to have been Muslim was unacceptable. So I actually ended up deciding, potentially career suicide, whatever you want to end up calling it. I ended up responding to his email and clarifying that point exactly. Later on, I ended up getting a message of support from the HR generalist for the firm out of California, right? And ultimately, that partner, unbeknownst to me at the time, was actually reprimanded, right, for that email. But that was something that I didn't learn until much later on when I had a conversation after having left DLA Piper with the office manager. So again, one of those things, you'll be tested, right? You're going to have your principles, you're going to have statements made by folks in power, and your response and the way that you end up handling yourself dictates potentially your career, but more importantly, how it sits with you as a person, right? Is this the person that you want to be? Are you upholding the values that you started off with, that you aspired to? When you were a child and, potentially dreaming of being a lawyer, are you fulfilling or being that person that you would have respected as a child? And that's an important question that you should ask yourself on a regular basis. With that, it was interesting. Again, that incident wasn't kind of a make or break, but it was an interesting, again, point of contention, right, where your identity is questioned. I had amazing luck that a friend of mine recommended me for a job at Dell. And that was the next stop within my legal career. So I had an amazing opportunity. I was actually the youngest lawyer to ever join Dell. Typically, to have an in-house position, you've got to have years of experience. More often than not, between 7 and 10 years, that's kind of an average that you look at to be a valued in-house resource. Given my tech background and my passion, one of the things I didn't even mention, literally every weekend, I used to, read the circulars, the Best Buy ads, anything related to tech, and I knew exactly what was on offer, what the prices were, right? And I just loved and followed that technology. So it was actually a dream at that point to work with Dell. And Dell was actually my very first computer that I ended up getting. So one of the things that I also wanted to talk about is this idea of finding a passion, finding whatever niche it may be within the law and pursuing that. And knowing that, hey, the dollars will follow, right? Anytime that you stand out as a specialist, people will want to come to you. I was really, really lucky. Dell at the time was the biggest technology company in the world, #1 PC manufacturer worldwide. I had actually started doing a lot of competitor analysis and claims and advertising and marketing, things that you never even realize is an actual venue to pursue when you're in law school. Most law schools don't actually offer classes related to advertising law and marketing law. How you end up taking opportunities that are presented will also end up dictating your career, right? One of the things that also happened at the time, there was this super novel concept that was so cutting edge. It was called Second Life. This was an online virtual platform where people created, what were they called? Some online personality, and you could actually build real estate and build products and sell products all virtual. This is a complete virtual world. A vice president at Dell asked, who's heard of Second Life? And when I raised my hand and I ended up getting assigned an entire assignment related to the negotiations between Dell and Second Life and the purchase of this Dell Island, and to ensure that Dell Island was running on Dell servers. Again, just an opportunity that presented itself because of a particular passion. One of the things that I also did early on, I had a very international background, and I have a passion for travel, for cultures, etc. And in my career, I ended up talking to my vice president that, hey, I'd like to have an international assignment. How do I get set up for an international assignment? And at the time when I brought it up, he came back to me. He said, Faris, what would you say if I told you that I need you next week in India for the next 2 months? And I was like, do you want me to pack right now? Ultimately, that was a hypothetical that he was asking, but he really wanted to just test that, a lot of expat assignments are not always in Paris and London, right? That there were opportunities that would get presented, but you needed to be there for the right reasons. But having that passion known helped me eventually when our general counsel ended up making a nomination for an executive leadership assignment. So I ended up being the first person from legal to go through this executive training program at Dell that allowed me to travel the world for 2 years and basically manage audits globally for Dell in various legal arenas, from trade compliance, through intellectual property audits, through privacy law audits, etc. That was a feather in my legal cap that almost no other attorney can claim to have done. The fact that I ended up directing Dell's first intellectual property audit, that I directed their first privacy law audit, was a tremendous, tremendous honor, and it ended up helping me with a promotion to a directorship at Dell, and I ended up being responsible for the S&P division, S&P being software and peripherals, which was a $10 billion business at Dell with global reach. So everything from cloud service agreements to hardware, software, mice, etc. One of the amazing opportunities that Dell provided was this ability to kind of rotate throughout some of the departments, right, and support different facets of the business. And the point that I was trying to make here, too, is that for whatever reason, in-house life suited me better. I wanted to be a more holistic lawyer, right? I wanted to be able to come in as a true counselor to the business and provide, my opinion, my insight into where the business might go. Dell was tremendously inclusive and actually just ended up winning an award this year as one of the most ethical companies in the world. Getting back to some of the cultural attenuations, Dell allowed me to sit as one of those diversity committees. And we ended up sponsoring NAP, which was the National Arab American Professional League. So I could end up giving back to the community to try to make sure that the legal profession was a little more diverse, right? That I could end up trying to influence to help that happen. One other learning that came out of Dell was the fact that I ended up taking that job because I was in awe of the executive director that I ended up interviewing with early on. He was a cyclist. He was a Harvard Law grad, very well-mannered, very, soft-spoken. And he had actually ended up winning a Grammy, which was, absolutely amazing. To think about just kind of, the talent that this lawyer ended up keeping. One of the things that I didn't mention about DLA, and I'll tell this really quickly just because I know I'm backtracking here. I remember even at the interview that I'd gone in with DLA, gone into the meeting room, waiting for my interviewer, waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. At that point, I was like, is this a test? Is this a psychological test where they're trying to see, am I going to get up, say something? Almost at the 20-minute mark, when I'm like, okay, I'm out of here, as I'm getting up, the partner comes in. And his first response is, I'm late. I wish I had a good excuse, but I don't. And, some people might think that's comical, but I remember taking that and thinking, what a tremendous disrespect, right, towards my time and, his viewpoint of, a potential associate coming in. And I'm not saying that's obviously reflective of every partner or just big firm generally, but I remember that sitting with me, and at that point, I actually made that decision. I'd gotten a lot of different offers, and DLA had just made it impossible to say no. They ended up offering me, I was getting offers from Wilson and DLA at the time. Anyway, the point that I'm trying to get at, I followed the money at that point, frankly, right? I made the decision for the money, right, that it was an easy decision, right, to end up staying with them and going on. Dell, amazing opportunity, amazing career. Everything is just, glowing. When out of the blue, I ended up getting an email from Apple over LinkedIn. And an Apple recruiter had reached out to me. They said that they'd followed my profile. They'd seen some other feedback that they'd gotten, and they wanted to fly me out to Cupertino. At that point, it's very difficult, right, to end up saying, I'm not really interested. Dell was going through some financial challenges. This was about the same time that Dell ended up becoming a private company. Michael Dell bought his own company, took it off the public stock exchange, and it wasn't as financially lucrative as it had been earlier on. To quote The Godfather, they ended up making me an offer that I couldn't refuse, right? It was a real challenge at that point as well, because I was very comfortable at Dell. I was respected. I had this, executive trajectory that I was on. But when I spoke to my mentors, they ultimately told me, this is an opportunity that you can't pass, right? It's an opportunity that even if you did decide against it, you would always wonder, what if? Frankly, had no one here in San Francisco or in the Bay Area. I had one friend of a friend who had been a graduate student at UT. Long story short, I ended up accepting the offer at Apple, and I was brought in for a super secret project as Special Projects Counsel. So we now know that project to have been the Apple Watch. So I had the opportunity to be essentially the general counsel for this product, the Apple Watch. As product counsel, you were responsible for all of the different facets of the product, right? From the advertising and marketing statements to the intellectual property questions, the trademarks. You're acting as that first point of contact, but ultimately, I'm not actually prosecuting a patent for the Apple Watch. I'm not actually filing for the trademarks. But you're identifying those issues and making sure that the right counsel or the right business units are consulted to ultimately pursue whatever legal advice that you have for that product. amazing opportunity. The idea of being part of a completely new product line, right, with completely novel legal issues. When you end up thinking about a watch, right, that's on your wrist, that has a battery, right, a lithium-ion battery that's attached to your skin, right, there's all kinds of potential health risks, right? We all know about lithium-ion batteries and some of the potential risks in fire, right, etc. So anyway, the point that I'm trying to get at, amazing opportunity. What I noticed early on is that the culture, at least within the Apple legal department, was completely different from anything that I had experienced before. There was a tremendous, almost fanatical fascination with secrecy. So, and I guess Steve Jobs was famous for, and I'm not sure if this is an actual validated story, but about an intern being asked, or engineer being asked a question in an elevator and firing them because they provided some information, even to Steve Jobs. So within the legal department, it was completely siloed. The projects that I was working on, I couldn't even consult with other attorneys within particular specialty areas. And a particular example, I was responsible for the Hermes deal. So, some of you ladies are shaking your head, recognizing that. The guys in here, I was completely clueless. I'd never heard of Hermes before. High-end fashion brand out of Paris. And it was only the second co-branding opportunity that Apple had ever engaged in. The only other co-brand was the Nike co-branding, right, that they'd done for Nike Fit. Point being, I was dealing with questions about retail that I'd never dealt with, and I wasn't allowed to even interact with the retail attorneys or the folks that worked in Apple retail. One of the other things that I'd gotten early comments related to was that there's best practices, and then there's the Apple way. And no matter what anyone else was doing, the Apple way was the better way. And I guess I kind of had some headbutting early on with my manager in some of the suggestions that I'd made about procurement contracts, et cetera, trying to bring some of the best practices that I had learned through my experience at Dell. And I was basically told, set all that aside. There's an Apple way and an Apple cultural fit. Getting back to one of the interactions that I also had with my direct manager. As a practicing Muslim, I would end up blocking 2 hours on my Fridays to be able to attend Friday prayer. And my manager at Apple had insisted on setting up my one-on-one at that same time. And this is, again, one of those kind of situations, right, where you can decide, hey, I can end up sacrificing, a personal belief or practice, for the sake of accommodating, your manager. And that wasn't a compromise that I was willing to make. Anyway, there were a number of other issues that ultimately led to a complete lack of assimilation, right, within that Apple legal department. And ultimately, I ended up pursuing another opportunity. And we're going to talk about that next, to kind of think about some of the other opportunities that you have when you end up facing difficulties, when you end up facing, a cultural fit that might not work for you individually. So even back when I was in law school, I had a buddy of mine, Jason Lloyd, my best friend from day one, actually my first day of law school, where I ended up meeting this tall, blonde Texan, right, with boots and his draw and his cowboy buckle. And we ended up, when he found out that I was Syrian, when lunch came around, he was like, dude, you want to go grab something to eat? Ana Juan. And I was blown away that this Texan was talking to me in some Palestinian dialect of Arabic, where apparently he'd had some Palestinian friends growing up. We'd always joked about starting our own law firm. And one of the things that we had done is actually incorporate early on. A little kind of side note on that Caucasian causality question. As an immigrant or as someone who was, other, it was obvious that we would use the Caucasian name first, right, within the law firm name, right? That's, always got that primacy, right, related to a name, and it gives a different kind of authority. What happened with the firm and the tremendous opportunity that was presented, I had a former colleague that was at Dell who was a vice president at Brocade. And she had reached out to me while I was still at Apple, telling me, Ferris, I've got a lot of cloud computing contracts, and I need someone that understands them the way that you did when you were at Dell. If you know someone that could do this, we have a tremendous amount of work. And, initially, it wasn't something that I was interested in. When I ended up experiencing, the challenges that I did at Apple, it was something that I reconsidered. Ultimately, I came back to my, ex-colleague, asked her exactly how much work that they had, and she said, I've got enough work for at least 2 attorneys to be busy full-time. So with that, I decided that, hey, this is a golden ticket, right, that I've got to actually try my hand at setting up our own law firm. And it ended up paying dividends. Really, that first year I was able to double my income that I had experienced from Apple, right? And that's seldom something that when you're starting your own law firm, you're going to have that opportunity to do. From there, I ended up getting involved with a network called Tech Wadi, which is Wadi is valley in Arabic, and it basically ends up connecting Arab entrepreneurs and businesses and tech enterprises that are both here within the valley and within the U.S., as well as the Middle East. So all of a sudden, I ended up getting all of these referrals for work from this network, and it's been a tremendous opportunity, right? One of the things that you should remember, and this kind of jumps down a bit, the challenges in setting up a law firm on your own are enormous. I cannot understate just how difficult it is. But one of the things that my Arab heritage had taught me was to be entrepreneurial, right? And the idea that if you're an employee, if you're an associate somewhere, if you're in-house counsel, ultimately you are dispensable. There are 100 other lawyers that can do exactly what you're doing. And this is a very difficult pill to swallow, right? When you think that you've put in all of this effort to be educated, to be so skilled at a particular area of law, but ultimately layoffs happen within legal departments as well. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about and kind of, close with is this idea of your own personal brand, right? When you think about yourself, think about the image that you want to portray, right, as a lawyer. a lot of times people want to graduate and all they want to do is join those big firms, right? Big law, and have that big law name, and that's the identity that you think that you're going to assume. But that's not the case at all, right? Big law is tremendous for getting your resume, right? To have that kind of instant credibility. But ultimately, people hire lawyers. They don't hire law firms. So it's important for you to, one, develop your own brand, make sure that you've got a LinkedIn profile set up. Set up a personal page, right, related to your own profile. I had a colleague that was at Dell, and one of the things that he loved to do was, talk about social media, right? And he set up a Twitter feed, he set up a blog related to social media. And he became the expert, right, within social media. And I think his Twitter handle is SOME, social media, lawyer. But opportunities end up presenting themselves to you when you also pursue a passion as well. And having that kind of branding, hey, I'm a social media expert, I am a startup law expert, whatever it is tremendously important for your future development and growth. Because ultimately, you may jump from firm to firm, you may go in-house, you may go back out on your own. The actual path that your legal career unfolds in is, a complete mystery. But what you can absolutely assure yourself of is your own reputation, right? And making sure that even when you're dealing with clients, make sure that you get feedback from your clients. There's a number of avenues that you can end up pursuing. The traditional had been Martindale-Hubbell, right? To end up getting your AV, certification or rating, rather, from Martindale-Hubbell. But having these clients that you've worked with, whether externally or whether internally, to provide that feedback and to provide those ratings is a really, really important takeaway for you as a lawyer. So you can end up being a portable asset. Ultimately, and this is something that you couldn't be thinking about at all right now, but as a partner at a law firm, right, they ultimately want to know you're either bringing a very specialized skill set or a portable book of business. And those are impossible if you don't develop your own brand. So I think we're at time, so I want to open it up.
I think your presentation was really thorough, so I think actually our questions that we had organized have been answered. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
Can you please talk a little bit more about the culture in general that you experienced in Big Law and how inclusive or exclusive it was outside of the email?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think ultimately it really does depend on the partner that you're working for. And to emphasize again, whenever you're looking at an opportunity, when you're considering an offer from a firm, it really doesn't matter what the firm name is. It really depends on who the partner is that you're going to be working with. That person is going to be your mentor. They're going to be shaping your career at a very, very early stage. And what they teach you or they don't teach you will end up staying with you throughout your career. So that culture, I think, is really dependent on the actual partners, because you can have a policy related to pro bono work, right? Or the ability to, move amongst different practice groups. But ultimately, if the partner that you're working for isn't having it, right, or is telling you, set aside whatever else it was that you got asked to do, and whether it's, orientations, associate trainings, etc., they can ultimately dictate almost carte blanche what your day-to-day is, despite whatever the culture of the overall firm may end up being. Any other questions that I can address?
Sure. So I guess like what tips might you have for people who end up at a firm that is, obviously it's not going to be as rosy and inclusive as they claim it is when you're interviewing with them. But I guess what practical tips you have, maybe like speak from your work at Apple, like do you kind of just keep your head down, try to stay professional and kind of, or do you, make a point to correct people like for everything they do? Because it's kind of, what's the balance?
Yeah, it's a great question, and no one person should take on this kind of atlas burden, right? That you're responsible for correcting every wrong, right? There's going to be certain ones, and this is going to come down to your personality, right? I can't give you advice other than to follow what sits well with you, right? Because ultimately, you can end up staying silent on something and have it eat you, right, every single day that you're sitting there. And ultimately, that's not the best experience either. What I do recommend is that it's important to develop a network, right? A network of friends, of peers, of mentors, right? And seek them out, not necessarily just from your own firm, right? And I think one of the mentors that I had when I was at Dell was actually a vice president at AMD, right? So it was actually a supplier for Dell, but I had no interaction with on a professional basis. The way that you can do that too is to get involved in these professional societies. So I was involved from my first day at Dell within the Association of Corporate Counsel, right? And ultimately ended up serving as president of the Association of Corporate Counsel in Austin. Having those peers at other companies, other firms, people that you can sound off to without having to worry about the political ramifications of the questions that you're asking, about making sure that you can kind of benchmark where you're at with what their experiences are. So that's another recommendation that I would make. So find a mentor, find friends within the law firm environment too. That mentor may be in a completely different practice group from what you're in, right? But they can help you navigate the ins and outs of the firm life and culture, and really, when it comes down to it, may act as an advocate on your behalf. And you never know how that'll come into play.
I would say one last question.
All right? Who wants to be our closer? No?
Did you face any, since you're not an American, so did you, not on the face of it, but did you feel that people were discriminating while giving you work professionally? Did you feel that it was hindering you, that you were not a part of it?
So, I know that some of these ended up playing out, especially at DLA, maybe with, the partner that I had kind of responded to. I know that, our relationship would never be, the same. But that was a choice that I was willing to make. There's one of the most egregious, and I'll talk about something that happened with my sister, right, in particular. She had graduated from law school. She was offered a felony prosecutor position in North Texas. And small town, and she would tell me that there were regular office emails that would go around at this district attorney's office related to Obama being a closet Muslim, right, and all of those allegations. And, at one point, she was just getting frustrated, right, when seeing all these emails come out. And she ended up, just, having me help her craft a response that, hey guys, office email should be for office purposes, right? And, these conversations aren't really appropriate. Ultimately, that went well, but she ended up earning a nickname within this prosecutor's office as Splinter Cell, right? So at that point, hey, they recognize that this is a Muslim girl that's in our office, and she's being potentially subversive, right? And again, ultimately, an environment that didn't work out for her, right? And it had real impacts, even though she was the very best prosecutor that they had at that office. And one anecdote to kind of just back that up. My sister, when she was doing her grand jury presentations, at one point, the grand jury and the judge asked her to come back in, and they met her with applause. And in that entire history of that, that district, that had never happened. So it doesn't really matter, right, what your actual professional accomplishments are. That doesn't mean that you won't face adversity, right? It doesn't matter, right? But finding an environment where you can thrive, where you can find people that will appreciate and judge you for the work that you're doing, not for your particular background, not for the color of your skin, not for your sexual orientation, is where you'll ultimately make the best for your career. So with that, I guess we'll close this. Is there any other commentary or